Hi there, and welcome to Central Texas Gardener. I'm Tom Spencer. You know, some native plants have become so much a part of our garden vernacular that we almost take them for granted. But there are many others that deserve recognition for their performance and utility in common situations. Today, we investigate a few of them and how they can work in your design. On tour, let's visit a garden where respect for the land guided its design.
When Christine and Pete Hausman fell in love with their property above the springs of Long Hog Hollow Canyon, they knew that their gardening was headed in a new direction.
My son and I, when he was little, we'd pick dewberries down there, natural wild dewberries, Texas blackberries down in the creek and everything, you know. So he grew up back here and enjoys doing things like this with me.
Birthday parties, what did he want? A camp out down below.
Connecting to the land is an heirloom passed down by Pete's great-great-grandparents, who started their farm in LaGrange in 1866. Pete knew he didn't want the traditional backyard.
That's not me. I've got to be able to get out and have a lot to work and to see the animals come up.
Also, he wanted to instill in his son and daughter the wonder of nature that his parents gave him growing up on Walnut Creek.
So when I came out here, I said, this is it.
We also knew we couldn't have carpet grass back here. And so we weren't going to have a volleyball, we weren't going to have croquet.
Instead, they have horseshoes and washer pitching.
We tried the plants, but there's deer and wildlife and coyotes and foxes and squirrels, and they ate all our plants. So we had to go a different route.
Rather than work against the land, they listened to it. To make it family-friendly for them and the wildlife, they patterned it with its native rocks.
The rocks he hauled back up here, when we moved in, we're thinking, we don't want these rocks.
Yeah.
He threw them all over the side,
and
then he was upset that he had to bring them all back up the
I
hill.
threw a lot of rock out because it's like, I don't know what I'm going to do here. Limestone has shelves here. You know, you'll have a shelf and then off and a shelf and off. So I started wanting to conserve some of the soil because when you get rain, you lose your soil. So the first thing I did was start scraping the rocks and to follow the contours to have dry rock so that the soil would go up against it, so start conserving soil. And then I would look at that and it's like, you know what, it's looking kind of bare. I think I need something over there. This yard is so low maintenance. We get a rain, all I do is rake some of the cedar back. Once you get it set with dry stacking rocks and everything, you just let it go. And the animals will come in and kick over a rock every once in a while, you know, an armadillo, the deer.
To give it definition, he followed the curves with handmade fences. Pete also built the fence that safeguards a tumble down the canyon without obstructing its view or the wildlife.
Down at my parents' farm in LaGrange, they have eastern red cedar. And eastern red cedars that they make cedar chests out of, where you sand it down, smell it, and it smells delicious, you know. Well, I started finding old dead trees down there that had probably been dead 50, 60 years, and all that's left is the red inside. And there's nothing more insect resistant, rot resistant, except for redwood, than a good red cedar. So I started bringing those home. I can keep it natural. It's one thing to put white picket fences everywhere or steel fences everywhere, but it's another to use natural cedar and all that, which doesn't rot, which doesn't need painting, you know. I believe in low maintenance.
That meant more family time to gather around Pete's fire pit to make s'mores. But its most special night came several years later.
The night before my son's wedding, he and his friends, instead of going out and partying because it's the night before his wedding, are back here at the fire pit just hanging out all night.
Playing washers, yeah.
You know, so
that's what they did beforehand. Great bunch of guys, yeah.
So I get up and I'm like, where is he? He's out back. You know, they were good, they were safe, they were back here having fun before the wedding.
The swing and picnic table that were Pete's first builds for the garden are still in good shape for the 2011 grandbaby.
This evolved. It's like, okay, that would look good.
It wasn't a one-night deal.
No.
It's taken 21 years for this look.
Like when I didn't have a place for people to come and sit, well, we put the decks in. This was bare, and it's like, hey, you know, I could do a patio here, you know, so I built this patio.
This was a birthday present. I went home to see my parents, came back, and I had a patio.
Yeah.
Their history as a family unites with the long-term story.
You'll see all the rusty tools that
Yeah,
came from the
just
farm.
kind of reminds me of the farm. The farm was a tremendous influence on my life. I don't overdo it because you've seen some places where there's just stuff, it's like, no.
But there's no way you can overdo a registered family brand from the 1800s.
Hey, it's pretty cool, I enjoy it.
Not too many families have a brand, so,
Yeah.
Then, inspired by Central Texas Gardener, they built a shed as the latest connection. It was 110 degrees that August when they framed it and topped with half rounds of cedar that had captured Christine's imagination.
And then we started decorating it, and then we realized, hey, this is more than a shed. This is a real getaway.
our favorite are when the storms are rolling in and you can see the dark clouds rolling in.
In fact, when we finished it, the first, 3 days later, a big thunderstorm came in, and we both ran to the back to see, does it leak? Yeah, and so we got in there, we had the windows closed and everything. Airtight, just perfect. And we thought, when you hear the rain on the tin roof, everybody likes rain on a tin roof. Well, believe me, when the rain hits that tin roof, you're right under it, it makes quite a noise.
Our kids are sad. They're like, why didn't you build this when we were little?
Yeah, they want to use it as a playhouse.
The garden's name, Lazy Acres, was inspired by Pete's favorite childhood book, Happy Acres.
This is from the 50s. My mom used to read this to me when I was sick.
Happy Acres tells the story of what happens when things get too lazy. This hard-working family gave its tale a twist.
When I came here, I said, you know what? It's a happy place, but once it's finished, I like a place just to relax, Sit in a lawn chair, sit in a hammock, lay in a hammock, whatever. I'm going to call this place Lazy Acres. And so we hung the sign down there.
Well, before the
Lazy
house
Acres.
was built, we hung the swing because we knew it was like a perfect window out there. And he put up the post, and we had Lazy Acres even before we moved in because we would come sit in the
Yeah.
backyard waiting for the house to get finished.
Yeah.
Their Happy Acres started through imagination and a kinship with wildlife friends. In fire pit nights after a dip in the creek are Lazy Acre memories forever.
It was just a
We
cool
actually-
backyard to move to.
We actually built it, dammed it a little bit, and made a little swimming hole for the kids when they were little in the creek. So it was kind of neat going until the first floods come and back silt it, But it was kind of neat, the kids going up, because when I was a kid, that's what I would do. We would dam up Walnut Creek, When I say dam it up, you put some rocks down, get it about that deep, and then on a hot summer day, lay in it, And I knew I could do that here.
So they sure didn't want their garden to mess things up for future kids and dads.
We are on a creek, and anything you put on this yard is going. In fact, we don't use lawn fertilizers. This takes no maintenance. I mean, really, except for a couple of cedars that die branches. We don't water it. We don't water any of these plants. It's whatever will take, our sparse rains, and so it's like, all right, what do? Keep the animals out and use a lot of water, pesticides, and fertilizer? Or say, the heck with it, let the animals continue to come in here and just let it grow natural. And I went that route.
Well, from a wildscape to wildflowers, we're going to be talking about native plants and how you can use them in the landscape with Andrea DeLong Amaya from the Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center.
Hello.
And Andrea, I always say welcome back to the show. You're one of our regular guests. It's always great to see you.
I love being here. Thank you.
All right. Well, we have some fun things to talk about today, and we're focusing kind of on the utility of some of these plants. But there are a lot of beautiful, graceful plants that we can use for useful purposes, right?
Absolutely. Some of the ones that I brought in and I want to talk about was for screening.
Right.
We talked about, I know we get a lot of questions where people are looking for screens, especially in shady spots.
Yeah.
And so there were a couple of things that I think work really well for that.
Right.
There's the wax myrtle,
Right.
which I love to use because it's a real dense, dark green plant with a real
Okay.
fine texture. It's a nice even texture in the backdrop.
Okay. Well, you actually did bring a wax myrtle, so let's. We have a small one here in the studio, and this is a plant that a lot of people have been using here in the Central Texas area for some time. I like it because, unlike a lot of the stiff ornamental evergreens, This one gives you a sense of motion.
Yeah, it's more pliable.
Yeah,
Sure.
when when the wind blows, even the slight breeze, you get a lot of movement on this plant. Mm-hmm. And it is evergreen and gets pretty tall too, right?
Yeah, so there's the standard, you can limb them up and have them be more like a standard tree or a multi-trunk tree. You can hedge them and keep
Right.
them denser if you don't let them get too tall and woody.
Right.
There's a dwarf wax myrtle, which still gets fairly big, but it's a little more compact and dense.
Right.
So, you can do different things with them, which I like. And then
Yeah.
they smell good.
Yeah, it's got a nice aromatic quality
Foliage
to it.
and the fruit are
Right,
really
and
fragrant.
pretty little fruit. It's like a miniature blueberry.
Yeah, not showy, but nice to see.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Well, while we're on the topic of the evergreen shrubs, Yaupon holly is another one that is really kind of hard to beat if you're talking about screening plants.
Yeah.
And a lot of people say, "Oh, Yaupon, it's an overused native," but for a good reason.
Yeah, it's super hardy, very robust plant. It's easy to grow in a wide variety of conditions, shade, sun. Again, like the wax myrtle, you can limb it up and have it be a beautiful specimen tree, a multi-trunk tree, or you can shear it and keep it more like a hedge.
Yeah. The first prune topiary plants in North America, Yaupon holly. English used them in their formal gardens in Jamestown Colony.
Yeah, they clip very well.
Yeah.
And then you get the red berries on them, and
Right,
that's a
right.
nice little added benefit. So, yeah, they're overused perhaps, but like you said, rightly so. I think they have
Yeah.
a really good purpose. Then there's the dwarf Yaupon, which stays
Right.
really short and
And my
can
favorite,
evolve.
the weeping Yaupon.
Yes, those are cool. Yeah.
They are very cool, yeah. So don't forget about the Yaupon holly and Ilex vomitoria, very colorful name. We won't go into that.
That's another story.
It's another story, right. You brought one that we have never talked about before on the show. And I remember this from my days stomping around in the big thicket in East Texas, but I know it also grows in Central Texas in the canyons like at Hamilton's Pool or West Cave. And this is a red bay. And it's Persea, I remember it's the first name of the Persea
Borbonia.
Borbonia,
Yeah.
right. And this is, I love these plants, and it's very aromatic. Speaking of aromatic, it is related to the bay leaf that you cook with, I think.
Yeah, I believe so. And that one, you don't see it commercially available very often, but it's a beautiful plant. You can see the leaves are really glossy, dark green, have a nice texture to the plant. They like deeper soils with a little bit of extra water. They're not going to be a xeric garden kind of plant, but
Yeah.
most regular garden settings would be just fine for
Yeah.
it.
Well, I'm real curious to see how it would perform in Central Texas, so I'm going to officially encourage people to try
Try it.
Now, this is probably going to be available, speaking of, it is not one that you're going to find in your chain store, but it probably will be available during the plant sale.
We'll have
that's
some
coming up.
available at the plant sale,
Right.
in April.
And we'll tell people more about that at the end of the
Great.
interview. But it's going to be a big deal, and I think I'm going to have to get a couple of those. So we've talked about screening with evergreen shrubs, but a lot of people have tight spaces they need screening in, and that's where the native vines come in.
Yeah,
So-
there's some great ones that, when you really have a tight spot and you can't fit something like a Yaupon, to have some kind of evergreen vine. And I believe Daphne's going to be talking about the Carolina Jessamine later in the
Right.
show, and that's a wonderful one with real
Real
fragrant.
obvious choice, yeah.
Yeah, really lovely plant. And then there's the crossvine, which is also pretty common already used, but again, there's a good reason for it. It's evergreen, it's very floriferous, it's a good hummingbird attracting
Right.
plant, a lot of benefits to that. It'll
Yeah.
grow in shade or sun, so it's very versatile.
It will grow just about
Anywhere.
anywhere. That's true. It's a tad rambunctious. Let's
Yes.
say.
Yeah, and give it plenty of space and something
Right.
sturdy to grow on, because it'll pull
Right.
down one of those little wimpy trellises. You need a big, substantial
Right.
trellis.
A real he vine trellis. Yeah. So those are some of the obvious choices. Less obvious choices, but plants that really deserve our attention are the native clematis. These are incredible flowers. Absolutely love these plants, and there are three that you want to highlight.
Yeah, so one of them is the purple leather flower, and it's called leather flower because the petals are very tough, kind of leathery, and a purpley color, and they're really cute. They curl out and they look like they're going to open up more, but they don't. Don't wait for them to open up much, because they kind of look more like a tulip, like a lily tulip.
Yeah, like a tulip that hangs down.
That's hanging down,
Right,
with the little curl on the edge of the petals. And that's a very sweet one. Again, it'll grow in shade or sun. It likes regular average soil, good drainage. And then there's the scarlet leather flower, which is closely related. It looks very similar, but it has a red flower, and it doesn't, the curls on the petals don't curl as much on the standard native form. But what's interesting about that one is that the scarlet leather flower is used as a parent plant for a lot of the hybrids that have been created in England, and have, like one we were talking about.
Duchess of Albany,
Duchess
which
of Albany.
is available in local shops often, and is a phenomenal little vine.
Yeah.
I love it.
It's sweet. So there are a lot of cultivars that you can find of that one, but the true native one is really hard to find in cultivation, and I believe we'll have some at our plant sale.
And there's the Old Man's Beard as well.
The Old Man's Beard is a really fun one. And I don't see people ever plant that on purpose, but sometimes it'll show up.
Yeah.
And if you do have access to it, and I believe we'll have some of those for sale as well, it's a cool plant. The flowers aren't particularly showy, but the seed heads are really, that's where the name Old Man's Beard comes from. They're really fluffy and
you see them all over the hill country.
Late summer and into the fall is probably its best time to see them.
So those are plants for the narrow spaces, and vines are perfect for that. Another thing that we want to talk about are ground covers, and you've brought a couple of plants I don't think we've ever mentioned before for different kinds of purposes. Now you are using these in lots of different ways at the Wildflower Center, but let's talk about these two different species that we have here. This is called wavy cloak fern or silver cloak fern, and I'm told by you, and I should believe this because you're the expert, this is a fern for the sun.
Yes, it's what we call a xerophytic fern. It loves the dry conditions. And I love telling people, especially from the east, that we have actually a wider range of species that occur in West Texas than we do in East Texas, that the plants that really like the dry.
Me.
Yes. But they tend to be shorter in stature and kind of silvery. And they have this other feature that's interesting. You can see some of the fronds here are curled up. It's like a resurrection fern. When it's dry, they curl up. And then when it rains, they rehydrate and open, and they're more green again. So it does that. But it's really beautiful, contrasted with big boulders or a prickly pear cactus or something.
Love it. So, and as brief as we can be, Nimblewill is a Muhlenbergia, so we know it's one of the native grasses. Of course, this is in its winter shade of pale. But real briefly, what would you say about that?
Yeah, this is one that I just think works so well flat as a ground cover, or we've used it at the Wildflower Center in our tank garden where it's billowing over. It's kind of a frothy looking green. It's very beautiful.
Okay, the plant sale, real briefly, it's coming up in the second weekend of April.
Yep.
And people can access all of the things that we're talking about here. And there are also a great, wonderful documentary coming up, Wildflower Seeds of History, that's going to be coming your way on KLRU and other PBS affiliates. So be watching for that. Andrea, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. It's such a pleasure.
All right. Take care. And coming up next, it's Daphne.
Hello and welcome to Down to Earth. I'm Daphne Richards, and you'll notice we have our resident CTG doggy horticulturist with us today, and he would like to say hi to Daisy. Our question this week is from Jean. She has a great question about fresh Carolina jessamine leaves and using them as mulch. This is a great question, especially since we recently discussed using freshly mulched tree limbs and bark around your plants and how that's hot. It is true that fresh mulch is a little too hot to use it around your plants. Freshly fallen leaves are not too hot. The carbon to nitrogen ratio on those is much lower, and so there's not as much problem with microbial activity. Because leaves are already decaying, they do have less carbon, which would then deplete your soil of less nitrogen. Our plant this week, we're going to go ahead and choose Carolina jessamine to match our leaf question. This plant's scientific name is Gelsemium sempervirens. It's a great vining evergreen plant that's native from central to eastern areas of Texas, and it's very common in the southeastern U.S. It's a great choice for a trellis or arbor. It does grow a little slowly at first, so give it a little extra water during its first year. If it's planted without support, it will mound up on itself and have a very different look than you might expect. It may also be used as a sprawling ground cover if you keep it pruned back regularly to keep it in bounds. So you do need to prune that pretty regularly in the summer after it flowers. Unlike deciduous trees, shrubs and vines, which are pruned in winter, prune these vines after they've flowered. This plant will perform best in full sun, but it does tolerate partial shade. In that partial shade, it will ramble more, have fewer flowers, and the foliage will be sparser, because that plant will be searching for light if it's in too much shade. It does have beautiful yellow, strongly fragrant flowers, so plant this near a window or a door. These flowers are very large and trumpet-shaped. Once this plant's established, it needs only moderate water. It does prefer sandy, moist soil, but it will easily tolerate our heavier clays here in Central Texas. It's a good alternative to more aggressive trumpet vines which have similar flowers. It flowers from late spring through early fall, so it's beautiful all through the summer. And once our temperatures get cooler, the leaves will turn a bit bronze. And as with most vines, it does need plenty of space. Gets 10 to 20 feet tall with support and 4 to 8 feet wide. It's hardy to zone 6, which is 2 zones colder than us here in Central Texas. At least normally, we're not that cold. To do in your garden this week, you need to wrap up any transplanting of trees, shrubs, and roses that you might consider doing. We are going to be warming up very quickly, so you do need to go ahead and get those trees or shrubs moved. If the trees are larger, you do want to go ahead and wait until next fall and consider root pruning them and then moving them earlier in the winter. We'd love to hear from you. Please visit klru.org/CTG to send us your question or a plant of the week from your garden.
Thanks, Daphne. Now let's check in with Tricia Shirey for Backyard Basics.
On Central Texas Gardener, we talk a lot about how to grow plants, but today I'm going to do something different. We're going to talk about how not to grow things. There are certain places in our yards and gardens where we don't want things to grow. Maybe right next to the house or a fence line, or near a walkway, and around electrical components too. Sometimes it's dangerous to be using a weed eater around those things, and it gets tedious to do hand pulling of weeds. And so there are ways to control plant growth where we don't want it. Now, of course, you can use the organic herbicide formula that we've talked about on the show, and the recipe is on our website. You can also do solarization of the soil, which we've discussed in the past, for large areas where you need to get rid of plant growth. But if it's a smaller place, then here's some ideas you might want to try. Now, mulch, of course, is a great way to suppress plant growth, but it isn't always effective in the long term, and mulch breaks down fairly quickly with our heat. So one of the ways you can make your mulched areas be even more effective at controlling weeds and last longer is by layering newspaper and then cardboard before you put the mulch down. I do this for pathways and large areas under trees where I don't want oak sprouts coming up, and I'll use several sections of newspaper, and I don't even lay it out flat. I add the sections of newspaper. Now, one of the things that you can do is just sprinkle lightly a little bit of compost if the area is very dry or the soil is very bad, and then put the newspaper down. The newspaper just helps to suppress growth, and adding the compost will increase microbial activity in the area and make the suppression even more effective. And then I only use brown cardboard. Don't use white cardboard that's been bleached with chemicals. And in the newspaper, stay away from the clay type shiny papers that may have chemicals that you don't want in your garden. Now, another thing, and then I just put the mulch on top, and I use the heavy duty mulch, the bigger chips of mulch that will tend to last longer than stuff that's ground very fine. Another thing that I've used that works very well is soil sulfur. Now, when you add soil sulfur to our gardens to help raise the pH or lower the pH of our soil and make it more acidic. But soil sulfur, when it's put in larger quantities, actually makes the soil toxic to the point where plants will not grow. So around my septic tank and my pump for my septic tank, where I don't like to use weed eaters because the weed eaters can be very hard on the plastic, I'll use sulfur, and I use the granular soil sulfur, the chunky stuff. This is mixed with bentonite clay, so it tends to stay in the soil longer and leach out more slowly. And it works very well. Now, the other added benefit is that the soil sulfur acts as an insect repellent and as a pesticide. So if you have soil sulfur around your house at the base of your foundation, you'll find that you have fewer issues with insects crawling into the house at those points. And sulfur will eventually leach from the soil and have to be replenished, but you're not making your soil permanently toxic like you might with some other chemicals. So soil sulfur in bands around areas where you need to control both plant growth and insects has worked very well for me, and I hope you'll give it a try too. This is Tricia Shari for Backyard Basics.
On a special note, tune in to KLRU's documentary Wildflower Seeds of History on March 10th at 7 p.m. That show will include Andrea's insight. Next week, Central Texas Gardener looks at succulent design and propagation. Until then, I'll see you in the garden.
To learn about today's program, watch online and follow CTG's blog. Check out klru.org/CTG.